Good afternoon. My name is Rada, and I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. Now we will be talking about the summary of the summit in the Saudi Arabia. Joining us online is Yehor Cherniev, member of the parliament, chairman at the parliamentary permanent delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Good afternoon, Mr. Yehor. Good afternoon, Mr. Yehor. So, what are the results of the summit? What should we expect for? Well, the results are positive for us. It was initiated by our party, by Ukraine. It's very good that we were able to gather more than 40 countries in one platform. It's twice bigger than there were in Copenhagen. During the first meeting like that, what's important, countries of the global south were taking part in the summit, and what's most important is the result. Everybody has agreed that the peace in Ukraine can only be achieved upon the conditions of territorial integrity and international rules and United Nations statute, which means that such countries as China, Brazil, and countries of Africa have taken the position of reason, the position of international law, and the position of Ukraine, which means that there can be no peace talks or peace plans without full re-establishment of our sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. That was the meeting on the level of the advisors, political directors of the foreign affairs agencies of Ukraine. That was the first stage where everybody expressed their positions, and it will be followed by bilateral work on every item of the peace plan by Volodymyr Zelensky as a complex approach to the peace settlement of the conflict and the preparation of the summit of peace, where the countries will be represented on the level of the first level government officials. Mr. Yehor, we know that one of the documents that was discussed during the summit was the Formula of Peace by Volodymyr Zelensky. But do we know what are the items that invoked most discussions among our colleagues? Well, what's important, what I want to re-emphasize, is that the control over the territory of Ukraine within the borders which are internationally recognized is the fundamental item. So then any country can, on the bilateral basis, choose the area like energy security, food security, radiation security, and basically this is what is currently being negotiated. Some items that would be included in the formula of peace but would be neglected or opposed by our partners, they just don't exist. All of them are national, all of them are based on the principles of international law, and they are all to restrict or to oppose the terroristic threat posed by Russian Federation. And the item of re-establishment of justice is being perceived by our partners as well, normally, so all the countries are ready to pronounce that or state that the aggressor should be brought to liability. Well, I see no other way for normal, civilized, democratic countries, which are the signatories of international conventions and even being, for example, if not ally, but a partner, for example, in the BRICS format, for example, like South African Republic, they tell Mr. Putin that he better doesn't come because the arrest warrant would be executed, the arrest warrant which was issued by international criminal courts. So there are no other positions other than bringing all the war criminals to liability. And the countries which were present, whose representatives were present, they are all signatories of international conventions, so it's not a problem. It's more about implementation of such right, because I hardly believe that Russian Federation, given the existing conditions, will turn in their war criminals so they could be brought to liability under the tribunal. Mr. Yehor, one of the principal news was the participation of China in the summit. What were the messages that we were hearing, and how do we evaluate the position of China? Well, we see that China is also looking for the ways to settle the conflict, to end the war. And we see that Russian Federation was not represented there because no one listens to their position, even such partners as China. And China, on top of that, is also interested in having the war ended because the war also directly influences China and they are affected by it. Those 60 million tons of grain that were purposed for China, they were destroyed by the Russian missiles in Ukraine. So to a certain extent, I think it became a trigger for China's participation in that summit. We see that gradually, but the position of China is changing from conditionally neutral to constructive, to the position supported in Ukraine. So China agrees with the formula of peace by President Zelensky and what's important with the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Mr. Yehor, we know that China was trying to push their so-called peace plan, which had a lot of discussions around it, both in Ukraine and across the world. Haven't you felt that China was somehow trying to push their peace plan again during this summit? Well, the Chinese peace plan also starts with the re-establishment of territorial integrity. And I think that the visit of Mr. Xi to Moscow, when this peace plan was announced, well, I think he had to agree such peace plan with the Russian Federation as well, but since there were no statements after the meeting of President Xi with Putin, for what I understand, Putin was not content with the plan like that, and now China is looking for other platforms where other countries could agree and support such a plan. So we agree that obviously the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine should be fully re-established. And I think that due to non-constructive position of Putin, China is looking for other platforms where this matter can be solved and Russian Federation can be influenced on. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Do we have any questions from the floor? Victoria Shevchenko, Ukrinform. As it was said, not all of the items of the formula of peace were supported by the participants of the summit. So can you tell us how can Ukraine convince partners to justify all the items of the peace plan, and can they change eventually? The formula of peace of President Zelensky is the proposal, the proposal for our partners, which is supported by many countries and the alliance, NATO, G7 and other unions. If any countries have any alternative vision, we are ready to be familiarized with that, but it shouldn't be in contradiction with the re-establishment with the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. We're not going to bargain our territories. We're not going to agree to refuse some of our parts and freezing of the conflict. The further items, other than liberation of our territories, as to environmental security, radiation security, food and energy security, I think that they are the logical reactions to what Russian Federation is doing. If our partners have any alternative vision how it can be solved in a different way, for example, the issue of demilitarization of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, let them make their proposals, because we know that radiation doesn't choose where to spread. They don't pick the countries. In case of catastrophe, food security, given the return of Russia to the Green Deal, again, let's work out the tools to influence this situation. So we are open to any proposals. Here is something we propose, and if there is an alternative vision, we are ready to consider it, but there is no such alternative vision so far. Mr. Egan, Yehor, talking about what's being discussed in the expert community, we understand that there is the next round of negotiations in the format of such summits. So what do we expect? What are the plans, and what does Ukraine await from such a next round? We wait for the practical steps, practical implementation of the agreed positions. I hope that this summit, the global summit, it will be occurring by the end of this year, and there should be some practical results presented there. So now we've just agreed the main items to maybe in bilateral format, on a bilateral basis, or maybe in multilateral format, to implement this or those items of the formula of peace by President Zelensky. Do we understand it correctly that China has already consented to take part in the following summit like that? Well, today there are optimistic forecasts that maybe it is so, but many things can change, so it will be more clear closer to the summit. Thank you very much for joining our broadcast, dear colleagues. I want to remind you, joining us was Yehor Cherniev, member of the parliament, chairman of the Parliamentary Permanent Delegation to NATO Parliamentary Assembly. So stay tuned. Let's thank our armed forces and work together for our victory. Glory to Ukraine.